Hi guys, it's Miss Christina here. Welcome back. Today we're going to read Josh's Halloween Pumpkin by Kathryn Lay, illustrated by Katie Breton. Josh's Halloween Pumpkin. As far as Josh could see, Grandpa Frank's pumpkin patch stretched in front of him, waiting for a game of hide-and-seek. The orange globes glowed under the full moon. "Close your eyes and count to 10, he told Callie. His little sister giggled. 1, 2, 6, 8. Josh stepped into the patch. He'd waited for the end of the long summer days and for October to come. The pumpkins were ready. Josh dodged and weaved, careful not to go too far ahead of Callie as he traveled deeper into the patch. Just 4, she was afraid of the dark, but never afraid of the pumpkins. Then he was standing in front of the biggest pumpkin he'd ever seen. Callie bumped into him and shouted, "You're it!" Josh pulled her in front of the amazing pumpkin. "Big, big pumpkin!" she shouted as she ran around and around it until Josh was dizzy. He tried to wrap his arms around the pumpkin. "It's as big as the wheels of Grandpa's tractor." He grabbed a thick stem and hopped up, pulling Callie to sit behind him. He imagined carving out the pumpkin, making windows and a door. "This is mine," he whispered. "My magic pumpkin. Grandpa just can't sell it." Callie shouted, "Mine too!" As he thought about all the things he could do with his giant find, Josh told her stories of smiling winged pumpkins that gave rides to the bravest in the land. The next morning, Grandpa Frank heaped waffles onto Josh's plate. "I'm expecting lots of customers this year." "Coming to see the magic pumpkin," Callie said. Josh put a finger to his lips and winked at her. She winked back with both eyes. Grandpa Frank said she was so sweet that everyone bought their pumpkins just for a smile from her. Josh ran outside at the beep beep of a car horn. Mr. Biggs, the town barber, was the first customer every year. "Got your wagon ready?" Josh nodded. Big Bill, Grandpa's farmhand, loaned Josh his pocket knife to cut the stems. Josh cut each pumpkin from its vine as people came from all around the county. He ran back and forth, his wagon filled with pumpkins of all sizes. But the special pumpkin stayed hidden for 2 days. Josh never took a customer near it. He wondered how Grandpa had missed something so big and full of possibilities. On the 3rd day, Mr. Keegan, the postman, discovered the pumpkin Josh had claimed as his own. "Yes, sirree, that's the biggest one I've ever seen," Mr. Keegan said. Josh stood in front of the pumpkin. "It's not for sale." "Not for sale," Mr. Keegan repeated. "Fiddlesticks. Tell your grandpa I'll be back tomorrow, and I'll pay him $25 for it." Josh slumped against his wagon. "You're mine," he told the pumpkin. At the end of the day, when Grandpa took Callie to buy her dress for the Harvest Festival, Josh slipped into the quiet pumpkin patch. He took Big Bill's knife and sawed until the pumpkin fell from the vine. He would be crowned the Harvest Festival Pumpkin King with such a thing, and he would ride in the biggest float of the parade. Josh pushed and rolled the pumpkin until he found a hiding spot. Inside the barn, in a dark corner, behind 2 bales of hay, and under an old quilt. He jumped when Grandpa Frank burst into the barn and shouted, "Josh, come quick! Callie is missing somewhere in Fielder's Woods. We stopped at Joe Tyler's to see his new pups and she wandered away." Josh's heart pounded. Callie was alone in the woods, the dark woods. Grandpa Frank called Big Bill. "We need more help to search." Josh remembered how Callie giggled and clapped as she listened to his stories about the pumpkin. "Wait, Grandpa, I've got an idea." He walked to the dark corner of the barn behind the bales of hay and pulled the quilt from the pumpkin. "How did you get that in here?" Grandpa asked. Josh explained his idea. Big Bill smiled. Grandpa pointed at his field hand. "Call everyone in town. Tell them to bring their jack-o'-lanterns to Eagle Hill. Tell them Callie's missing. They'll come." Josh and Grandpa Frank tied the pumpkin inside the wagon and pulled it to the bottom of Eagle Hill. They pulled and pushed and tugged the wagon until they reached the top, high above the Fielder's Woods. Josh watched as Grandpa cut around the stem of the pumpkin. Together they scooped out the mushy insides. Then Josh carved the pumpkin, 2 big round eyes, a huge triangle nose, and a wide smile. Inside they set 3 tall candles. "There," Grandpa Frank said. They pulled the wagon with the huge jack-o'-lantern to the edge of the hill, on top of Lookout Rock. Grandpa lit the candles and the pumpkin glowed. "Do you think she'll see it?" Josh whispered. Grandpa nodded. "It's as bright as the moon." The wind whispered through the trees. Then from the darkness dozens of glowing faces appeared. "Look!" Josh cried. The townspeople walked across the field carrying small jack-o'-lanterns. They placed them in 2 rows, making a path that led to Josh's secret pumpkin. The crowd on Eagle Hill stood in silence and waited. Josh sat beside the pumpkin. The pumpkin smiled, and Josh felt its magic. Then a noise. Just a tiny noise. Josh peered through the darkness, down the hill, and to the edge of the woods. A small figure walked toward them slowly up the hill. Then that someone ran through the jack-o'-lantern path. Grandpa Frank stepped from the crowd as Callie leapt into his arms. The townspeople cheered. Callie squirmed from Grandpa's hold and danced around the glowing jack-o'-lanterns. "Pumpkins! Pretty pumpkins!" She stopped in front of the biggest pumpkin and looked at Josh. "The magic pumpkin smiled at me in the dark. Was I brave?" Josh hugged his sister. "You were brave." Then they were surrounded as everyone hugged Callie and patted Josh's pumpkin. Callie gave a big yawn as the people gathered their pumpkins and walked down the hill to town. Josh watched the procession of glowing jack-o'-lanterns. He sat in the cool grass and drew his legs up to his chin. Grandpa Frank settled beside him. They watched Callie talk to the pumpkin. "That's some pumpkin," Josh said. Grandpa smiled. "It sure is." They sat side by side until the candles burned low inside the pumpkin. When the jack-o'-lantern face was dark and Callie yawned again, they tied the pumpkin to the wagon and walked home. Callie held tightly to Josh's hand. "It's yours," Grandpa said, nodding toward the pumpkin. Josh patted the bumpy skin and squeezed Callie's hand. "I know just what to do with it." On the day of the Harvest Festival, Grandpa Frank drove the tractor that pulled the biggest float in the parade. The jack-o'-lantern smiled from the center of the float. Callie, the pumpkin queen, rode the magic pumpkin as if they were flying through town. She waved and smiled to the people lining the street. Josh stood beside Callie as she rode her winged pumpkin and whispered in her ear, "You really are the bravest in the land." The end. Did you like that story? I think it goes to show that you should never wander off from your parents. I hope you find a magical pumpkin this Halloween. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.